guys, it's Maddie Q and welcome to the channel. We are the Misty Grove Podcast, and I am here with the amazing RangerAlthynia.
Hello.
She said her name right for once, so that's a big plus.
That's an improvement. That is a vast improvement.
So we were both actually live streamers on Twitch normally, but we were like, let's start a podcast because we hate ourselves and want to be busy 24/7.
Exactly. If we're not busy, what are we doing with our lives?
Boring, mostly, I would argue.
Oh, good God. So yes, about this podcast.
So this month the podcast is actually going to be like a little bit different than our normal in a sense, because we're doing it all LGBT themed since we're starting the first day of Pride Month.
Yeah, which was totally accidental, kinda, but it works out very well.
We didn't procrastinate this for months on end. I don't know what anyone's talking about.
No, not at all. I don't know what you're talking about, Maddie.
Yes.
But yes, we will be doing a variety of topics ultimately. We're going to be dealing with a little bit of true crime, some horror, video games, movies, stories, talking about legendary creatures and personal identities, conspiracies everywhere, creepypastas.
And then, like we mentioned, the first month is going to be really queer.
Yes.
My lovely, beautiful self is very, very homosexual, and so it's just like, I want to do this. And Ranger was like, okay. that was basically where we're at. But like you guys can tell from the title of this one, we're going to be focusing on LGBT in gaming right now, which sticks true to both of us since Ranger and I are both gamers. And we also both, live stream, like I mentioned earlier, over on Twitch, which those links will be in the description of this video. If you're on YouTube, that is.
And if you're on Twitch, you should totally go follow us.
No, they don't have to. It's fine. Well, we understand. We're not cool enough. It's okay. And then to add on to something else, most of the topics that we're going to be covering, especially in, I would argue, and actually in this podcast and throughout here and there on most of them, are a lot of personal opinions. We will be mixing facts into some of them. Like, true crimes will obviously be a lot more factual with opinions mixed in, whereas this one, we're not going to go deep heavy into a lot of the video games we're going to be mentioning. We're just going to kind of glance over a lot of them and be like, yo, so this is a thing. This is a game that has queer representation. This is what it is. We're aware of what it is. We probably could have done more research, but you know what? We're fluid at A's like that.
Smooth, Maddie, smooth.
I don't know what you're talking about. It's totally fine, Ranger. Here, why don't you go? How about you talk about the first game?
Okay, so yeah, like they said, we're going to be talking a lot more about what our perspectives of some of the games are, less so than actual details or anything about them, especially since there are so many games, and we'd be here for 5 hours if we talked about every single one of them in depth.
Or 10. No, 5 is probably actually more accurate. You're right, my bad.
So, generally speaking, Maddie, what was the first game you played that involved a queer or LGBT character or storyline?
I would argue that the first one I played, that if we want to talk about also queer coding in games, probably Shrek. Because for me, I feel like Pinocchio from Shrek, because I played Shrek 2 a lot when I was a kid. I really feel like that is Pinocchio's really heavily coded, in my opinion, to be queer. But, maybe that's just awkward teenage angst from a puppet.
From Shrek?
Yeah, because, in Shrek, the Shrek movies, there's actually Shrek games. Oh, yeah,
I didn't know there was a game.
Yeah, there's Shrek games for at least the first 2, and I still own the second one, I think, somewhere. It was on GameCube, and it's honestly, one of my favorite games. It's, co-op. It's honestly it's really funny. But if we're talking about actual queer in the game, it technically would be Sims, because I think with Sims you've always actually been able to romance the same sex throughout all their games. I used to play the second Sims, and even the third when I was a lot younger. I would remember going to my grandma's house, and one of my cousins would be playing, or no, one of my aunts. She was a little bit older than me, so that's a little confusing. But one of my aunts would play Sims all the time, and then I would randomly just steal it from her.
Good.
Sims, I really love Sims. It's a really good representation, I think, queer content. It could be working a little bit more towards it, which they're starting to do, small baby steps to it, but, we'll talk about that in a little bit later. Ranger, what was the first game you played with some queer content in it?
So it's kind of interesting because I hadn't thought of Sims, but I think the technical answer would be Sims. But outside of Sims, I think the first one I played that had some amount of representation, non-story wise, just general character wise, would actually be the Fable 2.
Oh yeah,
because
sorry, go ahead.
and we'll talk a little bit more about Fable 2 a little bit later, but it has your character, you could romance male or female NPCs. And outside of that, I think the next one where it was a firmly LGBT based character or game would actually be Life is Strange.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. I always forget Life is Strange has queer content in it, even though when I played through Life is Strange and Before the Storm, I'm still working on Life is Strange 2. You guys can see that on my YouTube channel. Yeah. But I forget it's really queer-oriented, even though, like, there's a clip of me on Twitch freaking out on Before the Storm when, you know, Chloe and Rachel kiss. No, yeah, Chloe and Rachel. Yeah, I was remembering the names right. And we're like talking about like not Sims, because Sims is like in a very unique category. I feel like I honestly don't remember what my first game was where I played it with a queer character in it. I just you think that I would remember like because like if that's such a big part of who I am as a person is like my queer identity, but I'm just like I remember Sims and making my Sims be gay or queer of some sort. I'm sure there's like some fighter game or something that I played as a kid or something that like actually had like was one of the characters was like queer in some sort though, because it wasn't often, but I know like a lot there are games here or there where there's like this character's queer and it's like, oh wait, really? Like that's a thing.
So I kind of wonder if maybe like some of that is because you do identify with LGBT, that have it playing the game that has it, it almost just rolls off your back, like almost taking it for granted. So it doesn't stand out quite as much versus for someone like me who isn't or doesn't, it stands out more.
I could see that happening with certain games, especially when it's like really passive representation. I will say that,
or very subtle,
or very very subtle, yeah. Because I mean, I'm always pushing for more queer content in games, and that's something I'm very passionate about is wanting more queer content in the gaming community, and it's something I really strive for. Is I want to make a really large change in the gaming community and to have more queer representation and like more queer voice actors. And I don't know, like, but it also I've gone through like a lot of trauma, so also a lot of my childhood is a little bit skewed or blurred out, so that could also be why I'm like, what was the first game I played with queer representation besides Sims? Like, I wasn't really. It might have been like it could have been Life is Strange, or like a number of games I played during Summer of Pride last year. Well, actually, no, I played Life is Strange, I think, actually before that. Maybe I should just go stalk my Steam library.
Yeah, and I feel too like maybe, especially with how big of a gamer both of us are, at the point that you reach video game number 256, you've just played so many games, they all kind of start to blur together on how, like, what order you played them in.
No, exactly. Like, I think just on Steam alone, I like game 256. I own, I think, almost 400 games or something on Steam, and that doesn't include, obviously, like, any games I own on one of my consoles, games I used to own in the past. We actually, technically, Pokemon probably was actually one of the first ones. Like, thinking about it, because Pokemon X and Y, didn't it have a...
Yeah, we're actually... that's actually something I have wrote down for us to talk about a little bit, is actually Pokemon in particular, because I found the way they dealt with it particularly interesting.
Do you want to go ahead and jump into that, since we...
Yeah, we can actually jump right into that, because the way Pokemon X and Y, for those of you who don't know, is there's two trainer classes. Like, you know how there's beauties, black belts, Cub Scouts, or whatever the little kid ones, like, specific character types or NPC types. In Pokemon X and Y, there's, I don't know where in the game, because honestly I don't think I ever actually really played X or Y. There's a Pokemon trainer named Nova, I believe is her name, where she tells you as the player that she's a beauty, which is a trainer type, but that she used to be a black belt. Which doesn't sound that exciting until you look deeper into it. And in Pokemon, beauty characters are exclusively female, while black belt characters are exclusively male. So I felt that was a really good subtle representation there. The issue with it, because I feel it's both a good and a bad thing. good because it's included, but the bad part comes in that in the original Japanese version, she explicitly credits her transformation to medical science. Like, specifically. But when they brought it over and translated it into English, they cut that out.
That's actually kind of weird that they cut it out for, like, the English translation, you know? Because it doesn't discredit the transgenderness. I don't like how of it. That sounded kind of weird in context, that word. But it doesn't really discredit the fact that Nova would be transgender, male to female, which I actually like because I feel like there's less representation, I think, for transgender women than there is for transgender men. I see like a lot of representation for transgender men, and there's actually a trans game that is coming out this summer that I can't remember the name of off of the.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about, and it's right there on the tip of my tongue what the name of it is, because it's one I want to pick up when it comes out. But I cannot think of the name or bring it forward. Yeah, I know, like, I know with Pokemon, and I don't necessarily know if it's a Nintendo issue or a Pokemon USA issue or, like, kind of what the issue is. But Pokemon has a really nasty history of changing things or trying to downplay certain things. Like the infamous, quote-unquote, jelly donut in the anime, which was actually a rice ball.
Yeah, I know, like, Pokemon was really bad about, I think, translating stuff for, like, really no real reason. Like, there's a lot of, like, Americanization of stuff for it, and I'm like, I don't understand why. Like, just leave it as it is. But I think in this case it's weirder to me just because Japan is notoriously is farther behind than America when it comes to queer issues. And the transgender game, by the way, guys, is Tell Me Why. I just looked it up after some struggle, but it's Tell Me Why. It's coming out this summer. I'm planning to pick it up like Ranger, so if you guys aren't aware of it, you guys should go check that out. But now, with the transgender character Nova, like, it's kind of weird to me that, like, they would just edit the dialogue so much for that down and water it down when America, even though we have a lot of issues with trans people dying, especially trans women people who are constantly murdered every year. There's so many deaths around that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a person of color, that even adds a second layer onto it, that they would just completely cut out, like, the medical science dialogue, which seems, again, small, but it's kind of like, what was the reasoning behind it and what was the point? Why did they have to water that down when it wasn't watered down for a culture or a country, I should say, that is notoriously a little bit farther behind than some other progressive countries? Or more progressive countries, I guess I should say, since America, again, has their own set of issues.
Yeah, and that's something I've wondered with this particular instance of just cutting that dialogue is what about the English version that they felt that they couldn't include it? Was it something like a prejudice on the side of the people translating it or creating it for the English market? Was there a concern that if they included it, that the game was going to get boycotted or something? Like, what was the concern there? I don't think anyone's ever gotten a really good answer to that.
It could almost be argued, I feel, that it's because Pokemon is technically more geared towards kids, even though it is a game that all ages play. Literally all ages play it. It's not appropriate for kids, could be like the argument, because a lot of the time you see people who are like, don't kiss your partner of the same sex in front of my children. That's sinful.
And yet it's complete nonsense, because if it's a man kissing a woman or vice versa, it's perfectly fine and appropriate for kids. And yet a man kissing a man or a woman kissing a woman or isn't. Like,
well, of course, you won't become gay, apparently, if you see a same-sex couple kissing, Ranger. It's like, oh no, cover your eyes. You're seeing two men kiss. You're gay now. No. Even though my gay self grew up on heterosexuality shoved in my face. And I say shoved in my face in the sense of, like, there was just almost no queer representation. I think the first like media that I saw for queer representation was actually Brokeback Mountain. Which I think everyone around my age was like, that was probably their gateway into homosexuality.
And see, that's interesting to me that was your first, because my first, media-wise, I mean, was actually the TV show Will and Grace.
I never actually watched that show.
You never watched that show?
No, I didn't. I'm
It
sinful.
was really big in the 90s, and it was basically, and again, I'm not going to go too much into this since that's not what this is about, but it's a TV like sitcom, and it was about a guy and a girl living in an apartment together. I don't think they were together or anything, they were just living together. And the third main character was one of their best friends who was a gay man. But of course, it being the 90s, I haven't watched the show in a really long time. I was a kid last time I saw it. But from what I remember of it, it wasn't that the show was bad or did representation bad, but it was leaning a little too far into the stereotypical gay man.
Yeah,
if that makes any
no,
sense.
I understand what you mean. And that goes and ties into some stuff that we're probably going to talk a little bit on this podcast, but and also in a future one, that like is stereotypical a bad representation. I think that's kind of relative, you know, like,
Yeah.
because there are just like a lot of people who are literally just a stereotype, and it's not a bad thing because stereotypes come from a place like. They form because X amount of people from a specific demographic are a certain way, and that's how you get stereotypes, regardless of how untrue they end up being as time progresses.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's weird thinking about that, like, because there's like certain games that you could just argue, like, I know for like Overwatch, talking about controversial games, Overwatch has two gay characters. Actually, they have Tracer, who is the face of the company and is a lesbian, if you don't know, and then the character Soldier 76, he's also flaming homosexual, not flaming homosexual, but he's gay, you know. And I know there's like I hear controversy all the time on whether or not that's proper representation, and I feel like at this point it's just kind of like, I don't see why it wouldn't be considered proper representation. Why was that so hard to say? Because like, I don't feel like you always need characters to be shoving their sexuality in their face or their
Yes.
gender identity in their face in order to have that be good representation, because like just having it, especially on a game like Overwatch that is a AAA company, it is one of the most popular games right now and has been for a while now and is still really ongoing, that the fact that their face character and like their basically their Call of Duty character 76, like, who is a decently played damage character in Overwatch, are gay. It's like, I think, a really big thing, especially because there's not a lot of like AAA games that have like a queer character as
And an openly one at that.
and an openly one at being the face of their character, like Tracer is, which I think is huge. Having like she's such a lesbian. Like, you can tell from like the subtleties with her clothing choices. She wears Crocs, very lesbian aesthetic. But like, I think that's like a huge thing, you know. And I understand controversy. Most things are gonna have controversy, you know. But I think having something like that is really important for like a teenager or even a younger kid who might be playing
heck yeah.
Overwatch, because of how widely receptive it is and whatnot, to have that, even though it's such a minor part of them in the grand scheme of things. But I just find that really important, especially because Tracer, like, there's like sprays and stuff in Overwatch, if you don't know, and like a good portion of her skins are her girlfriend. There's like the whole one of the comics
Really?
is focused around Tracer's relationship with her girlfriend, and she has dialogue with other characters in game of talking about her girlfriend as well. And it's not
That's very cool.
It is really cool, and they're not like watering it down or anything. They literally use Emily, like that's a feminine name, you know. There's photos of them. I'm pretty sure some of the sprays are them together as a couple as well. So, you know, I think it's like I feel like we went off on a tangent, but it's flowing, so whatever. I think when we talk about representation, in like gaming, we need to look at it as it doesn't have to be a queer specific game to be good representation.
Yes. Like, I feel like games like Dragon Age, Mass Effect, Fallout, Fable, again, going back around to Fable 2, and actually, even Life is Strange, I feel like would fit into this, actually, come to think of it. Actually, I think most of them we were thinking about talking about Sims as well. I think they do really well in the sense that either within themselves or as a group of games, not only do you have a variety of different personality types, you have the ones that are a little bit more of the stereotypical, but you also have the ones that are more subtle, and you have all those shades of gray in between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But then with a lot of these games, you have your player character. It can go either way, and giving the player, and especially if there's young players, and letting them make that choice and make those characters into whatever part of the spectrum they are, I think is an amazing thing for representation.
And also something I really like, because I am personally with Mass Effect and Dragon Age. I'm going to talk about those real quick. I know with Dragon Age, I've only played Inquisition, and I've only played Mass Effect Andromeda. I forgot to look up some of the side characters' names and the romance options, but, you know, it is what it is. Something I like that they do is, like, with those two games in particular, so, like, the most recent incarnations of Mass Effect and Dragon Age, is that the characters are... There's, like, characters that are gay. There are characters that are straight. There's characters that you can date regardless of your character's, like, gender or, like, whether or not you're a masculine or feminine presenting character for your player character. And I think that's, like, really cool. Like, for example, with Dragon Age Inquisition, you can only romance Damien if you're a guy because he's canonically gay. Like, part of romancing Damien is learning that his father was really abusive to him and did some really messed up stuff to him because he came out as gay. And part of the reason Dorian, ran away from home and started doing his own thing was because he wasn't accepted back where he came from. And then I don't know a lot about Sarah, but I know Sarah's a lesbian in Dragon Age, and you can only romance her as a female character. And I just think that's, like, really, really neat that they add, like, certain features in that. And I think Cassandra she's straight, I think. And then I think there's, like, there's a guy who I think is, like, exclusively straight in Dragon Age as well. But I can't remember the name of him off the top of my head.
So I decided to look it up because I know the character names, but I couldn't remember what the makeup of them are as far as relationships go. So with Dragon Age Origins, which you really do need to play, Maddie, it's a really good game.
I need to play all the Dragon Age games, honestly. I think all of them have... I think you're able to romance regardless of gender.
In Dragon Age 2.
Okay, so it starts in Dragon Age 2 and then goes from there.
Yeah, because in Dragon Age Origins, I love me some Alistair. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
But Alistair is female only, so usually I'll play a female character because I love me some Alistair. But the other three characters, Liliana, she is bi, so you can romance her whether you're male or female. Morgan, she's the one I would have expected you could go either way, but if you have to play a male character to romance her. But then Zevran is you can be male or female and romance him. I actually feel like overall Zevran on his own is actually just really good as a LGBT character and a bisexual character at that, just because I'm trying to think of what way to put this and how to describe him as a character without just totally telling everything about him as a character, since you haven't played it yet.
Play all these games for yourself as well, guys. Give games that have queer representation some love if you're able to. Even if it's just a matter of purchasing some of these games to show that, like, there's still an interest for these type of games. Even if you don't plan on playing them anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as he goes, he's really good because looking at him, the way he talks to the other characters, you can tell he is probably bisexual, but it's a little bit more subtle. It's in the little bits of dialogue, the flirtiness with characters of both types. Like, it's not that they're explicit about it, but they're not hiding it either. And I just think that in particular with that character, Zevran, I just found it very cool that they did it really, really well with him.
I actually really like that, and I feel like in general Dragon Age has been really good about that, because even Dorian, where, again, part of romancing him, or even I think it can be part of just, learning his backstory. I don't think you necessarily have to romance him to go down the storyline, is that he is gay. Like, that's a huge part of his character trait, And I just really like, in general, that, like, all the characters that you can romance, or just in general throughout the game, none of them really shove their sexuality in your face, It's just kind of like...
Yeah.
They're passively queer, and you might see them passively looking at a character that they're attracted to based off of their gender preference or preferences for what gender they are attracted to. And I actually think that's, like, really a really nice touch. I can't talk a lot about on Mass Effect. I do know Mass Effect, at least in genre. I don't know when they added it, but I know there's, like, certain characters that are straight. I know there's certain characters that are queer. But honestly, I need to play more Mass Effect. I have a Let's Play of it on my YouTube channel, and then I haven't played it in, like, ages, and I never really got that far.
Yeah.
I need to play more of it. So I don't know if it's like as good as Dragon Age where it comes to those subtleties that I personally really like. Like I love character games that are like LGBT focused, don't get me wrong, but it's also really nice just having like this like passivity of queer representation, especially in a game where you can choose to romance who you want within some limits, because I think that's also really important that like unlike Sims, which I love Sims, you can kind of just romance anyone you want regardless of gender identity or like presentation, without modifications, obviously, because there are mods for like queer mods and whatnot. Because it's really good, I think, for younger kids that are, or like even teenagers who are trying to learn their sexuality to like be able to see, like, oh, so there are some people who are literally like only gay. There's some people that are only straight. There's some people who identify maybe as bi or pan who will date masculine or feminine presenting people or in between, you know. And I just think that's a really important thing to have, and I feel like Dragon Age and Mass Effect are two like really good games. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never played Mass Effect, but I definitely with Dragon Age feel like they did really well. And generally a lot of the choice-based games seem to do really, really well on this topic overall. I mean, none of them are perfect, don't get me wrong. But I feel especially considering some of the topics the games deal with and some of the hurdles they may have had to run into trying to figure out like how to create all these characters, especially with how many some of them have. Like I'm looking at Inquisition's list right now, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8, 9 people that you can romance.
Yep, and I think
that's a lot of characters to create. Like,
and I'm pretty sure, if from my knowledge, I don't think it's even, or I think it's relatively even, because I think there's a straight woman and a straight guy, and I think there's a gay guy and a gay woman, and then I think the other 4 you can romance with either gender, if I'm not mistaken. So for the most part, it's like relatively balanced. Like, yeah, there's like 4 characters that you can date regardless, but I think that's actually really nice and kind of shows how society, I think, would be, because I think a lot more people would be. I think there's a lot more people who are bisexual or pansexual, basically, I feel like. But because of how society is, I think it shames people for that. And it puts people, it makes people feel like they have to be in a bubble. And even, like, within queer culture, you have that issue, too, of, like, erasing anyone's sexuality if it's not, like, gay or straight.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing with a lot of these games I really enjoy is the fact that with a lot of them, if you don't want to go with either going more of the heterosexual route or otherwise, you don't have to romance anybody.
Yeah.
Like, you could just have your character just be their awesome self and go it alone. Like, they don't need to be in a relationship to be an awesome character or awesome hero. They can just be themselves.
And in that case, you could... Ooh, sorry, go ahead, Ranger.
Yeah, oh, you're okay. But I feel like that's something, and I think that's on both sides. I don't think that's necessarily something that is unique to LGBT. I think that's across the board, because I've even noticed, as someone who is really used to, or at least was, to having, obviously the majority of media is surrounding heterosexual relationships and marriages. But it also comes back to the idea of, like, you have to be in a relationship to be worthy, or you need to be in a relationship to be your best self, even though it's obviously not the case. So the fact we're also seeing a lot of these games where whichever way you decide to go with your character, or not at all, it's validating all of it.
Yeah. And even Life is Strange actually ties into that as well, because you don't have to choose to do the romance options, even though I believe, again, I know Life is Strange 2 has it. There's gay. I know that because I got like spoiled by a thumbnail by a YouTuber I'm following. Don't know exactly who it is because I haven't got that far and it's been a while. But even you don't have to choose the romance, the queer. Like, is that the only romance option? Yeah, the only romance options in Life is Strange are queer. It is what it is. I think that's really cool. We need more games like that. But unless I'm mistaken, Ranger.
So, I'm trying to think. Life is Strange 2. I know there's, like, 2 romance options. One is queer, one is not.
Oh.
I won't go any farther than that because you haven't played it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well then, for the most part, like, on Life is Strange Before the Storm and Life is Strange 1, then more specifically, there was really just, like, You can roam, like it's very subtle in the
Yeah.
original Life is Strange with Chloe and Max. It's really, really subtle, but the
Yes.
queer, it's very, very much so queer coded without
Yeah, and I
fully
feel
stating it.
Yeah, and I feel like even Life is Strange 2, even though for obvious reasons, is not focused on a relationship like that, because that'd be
Really messed up given the circumstances.
really messed up since the two main characters are brothers, like, so that it won't be a major part of it, rightfully so. But even so, like, I feel like the overall coding of all the different characters and their identities are relatively clear and done really well. Some are a little bit more subtle than others. Some are a little bit more obvious than others. Just Life is Strange in general is actually just pretty cool.
Also, let's talk about Fable, actually, like, kind of tying into Life is Strange. Like, I love Life is Strange, and I really appreciate the subtleties of that. But I think Fable, because I have never played Fable, but Fable 2, from what I understanding from Ranger, has a really unique take relative to these other games, where Sims, you can kind of just romance anyone you want, as long as, like, they're in the same age bracket. So teens can only date teens, adults can, and then once you're an adult, you can date any adult, young adults, elders, whatever. And then Mass Effect and, Dragon Age, which we talked about.
Have specific characters.
Yeah, they have, like, specific characters that you can romance, and also they are party members. I think that is something that we should actually talk about. You can only romance party members, to my knowledge, on Dragon Age. I don't remember on Mass Effect off the top of my head. I think you can romance people who are part of your crew, but not necessarily people who are going to go out on an adventure with you. Because I know in Mass Effect Andromeda, I was trying to romance the mechanic, and I don't think he can actually leave the ship with you. And then Fallout, there's also Fallout, which is in a weird place. Love Fallout. I don't think there's gender-specific romance options. I think you kind of just romance whoever you want, kind of like Sims.
But it's only if they're companions.
But they're only your companions. Yeah, you have like X amount of characters you can romance, and they're your companions. And obviously, with like Fallout 4, you can't romance like Dogmeat or Cogsworth, I believe. Although I would have romanced Cogsworth if I could. I would fully do that. I love me some monsters and robots. I will be very open about that. But let's go into Fable now, because I think Fable has a very unique take on all
stance on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Fable, I feel or Fable 2 in particular, because I've not played the first Fable game, and I pretend the ones after Fable 2 don't exist.
Why? What? Why?
I just didn't care for their gameplay. That's all.
Okay, fair
They're
enough.
probably. I think in fairness, they're probably okay games. They weren't for me. So to me, they don't exist. I'll just go back to Fable 2. But Fable 2 is really interesting in the point, and I didn't catch on to this when I played it, because I didn't focus too much on the romance aspect of Fable 2. I was just too busy being evil, either really good or really evil, which is a different topic for a different day. But what the Fable 2 runs, I'd say it's somewhere in the middle between Sims, which seems to be a free-for-all, and Mass Effect and Dragon Age, where it's only your companions or only your known characters. Fable 2 does it different. In Fable 2, you are able to romance basically everybody NPC-wise, but they all have their own identities. Like, some NPCs are straight, some are gay, some are lesbians, some apparently are both. And so, depending on what kind of character you're playing, is going to depend on which NPCs are you able to romance. You can't romance them all.
Watch me. I will do it out of spite.
And something quite slightly unrelated, but kind of is it also depends on the kind of character you're playing, because with Fable, there is a mechanic for, like, if you're doing more evil things, you're going to be considered evil. If you do more good things, you're going to be considered a hero. Fable 2 in general has a lot of cool mechanics, but again, a lot of them aren't necessarily relevant to this discussion. But yeah, no, just the fact that Fable has it where NPCs have definitive sexual identities. And you're not necessarily going to know them until you try romancing them. And they're like, oh, hold up, bro. Or they're like, heck yeah, let's do this. Like,
meet me in the bedroom.
And, like, I didn't even realize this until I started looking into it a little bit more. And the reason I ended up learning of this is because I was reading, like, an article or something, or, like, a Reddit post or something, where a kid, like, I could say kid, but it was, like, a teenager, kind of started finding his identity through playing Fable 2 and kind of trying on that hat of I'm gonna play a male character and romance all the gay guys I can do it, and apparently romanced every single one that was in Fable 2.
All right, I support that. That's actually really
I'm like,
cool.
you know what? More power to you. That's amazing. I love that.
See, and that's part of the reason why I love games like this, though, is because, like, I'm sure if we were to Google it, there would probably be so many stories like that, you know, for all these different games like Mass Effect and Fallout and, like, Dragon Age and Sims and stuff, where people who are, like, teenagers and kids who are maybe grew up playing some of these games being able to discover their sexual identity or like even gender identity through playing these games, you know. And I think that's just like really important to note, and why a big thing on why representation I think is really important.
And just and the fact that some of these games, they're not small games. Like Life is Strange, I want to say Life is Strange is considered AAA at this point, isn't it?
I think technically it always was, because I don't remember if it's Square Enix. Square Enix is part of Life is Strange, I believe. I don't remember if they are the producer, or if they are the publisher.
But yeah, like I feel like overall it's just really super important to have all this representation in these games, because it validates their identity. Like for a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid trying to find themselves, and when most, if not all, media is saying if you're not straight, you're abnormal, or if you're not straight, you're not whatever. Like, that's incredibly damaging.
It is.
So it's really important for there to, in video games, in movies, in books, just to have this representation.
Also, I lied. It doesn't seem like Square Enix actually is part of Life is Strange, according to my Google search. The developer, they might be the producer. It's not showing me the producer from what I'm looking at, but the developers are actually Don't Nod Entertainment for the original one, and then someone named Feral Interactive ended up by Life is Strange 2.
Huh.
Oh no, I lied. Haha, ignore me. Life is Strange. Square Enix is, I think, Square Enix is their publisher, because it's the first link for Life is Strange 2 is literally Life is Strange 2 dot square dash enix dot dash games.com. So I think Life is Strange is actually kind of in a weird place where it's not developed by a AAA company, but it is produced by a AAA company.
Yeah.
And also, I guess we should also add Outer Worlds, I think, is another game kind of in this category as well, along where you are able to romance. I'm pretty sure because it's made by some people who worked on Fallout, I think you're able to also romance queer in a queer aspect. I just haven't actually played Outer Worlds, and that's neither has Rangers, why it's not actually on this list. All the games we've been talking about so far is at least something that we've played to some extent.
Or have some knowledge of, or...
Yeah, at least, like... do a little bit. Like, I've played, again, I've never actually beaten Dragon Age Inquisition, because it's just, I got burnt out from it because I was always playing on stream for a period of time, and then I just never got back to it. And the Mass Effect Andromeda is just something I need to actually jump back into, which I'm probably going to try to do soon, because I actually really miss that now that we're talking about it. And then, like, obviously Fallout, Life is Strange, Fable, Sims is Sims. But, like, tying that all in is kind of, like, why representation is just so... It's, like, really, really, really important for games. Because, like, we were talking about, like, so many people, like, especially, like, kids and teenagers, will discover their sexuality and be able to find characters that they, like, relate to. And by playing these games. And I think that's, like, a really big thing. Like, it could save a kid's or teen's life having that, because I know that when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of games that were massively produced that were queer coded or even had queer content in them, you know. And being able to have someone you can look up to that is a really just a bad butt I'm trying to avoid cursing, my bad, could really save someone's life who is, like, maybe not being rejected in their home life and abused or something for just trying to be themselves, you know? and it gives you an idol or icon, like just like a normal celebrity, you know. A fictional character, I know,
Yeah.
can be way more important to someone. Like I know, I watched some drag shows, and Bitch Pudding, who was the winner of Dragula season 2, she talks a lot. It's very open. It's actually a live streamer. They're very open about the fact that like part of the way they got through their like life when they were a kid from being bullied for being gay or queer or whatever was by being able to come and play these fighting games and stuff with like these like really badass like female characters, you know, and like having characters like that, like female characters too, that are like really strong, and for a more feminine gay guy could be, or a feminine lesbian or whatever, having all these different types of representation is like really good to give a young person something to escape to and someone to look up to.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why when it comes to representation and the response to that representation starting to increase the last couple years, I know one of the big criticisms I've heard about it is, well, they're shoving the LGBT agenda in our faces. But yet, if we actually look at media as a whole, or actually, we'll just even take the video games. If you were to condense the whole of video game history down into only 10 games, 9 of them have all the representation you could want for someone who's heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
You may or may not have one game with
Yeah.
the representation for the LGBT crowd.
And I will say representation in general could be better. Like, I think there could be a lot more and better representation, I think, for people of
Yes.
color as well. Especially, there should be a lot more representation for people of color that are queer.
Yes.
Because there's not, even within these queer games, there's not a lot of that, you know? There's not a lot of queer representation for people of color, with some small exceptions of, like, you know, Life is Strange 2, the main character. The main character, the guy he plays, as I'm blanking on his name because it's been so long, but he's Mexican or Latino of some
Yeah.
sort, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he is.
And then, you know, like, I know in Mass Effect, the engineer who I was romancing, he's a person of color. Dorian's a person of color. But even with that, like, you could do more with it. I would honestly rather see a game. I would love to see a game in Fallout where, like, none of the romance options are white. Like, just give me, like,
trying to think. I know with Dragon Age Origins, Zevron isn't necessarily. I wouldn't say he's a person of color or anything like that, but he's definitely, at least from what I noticed of him as a character, he's definitely coded to be the other. Because even in the game, he comes from an area that is prejudiced against. Most of a lot of characters are like, ew, not that area. So, like, it has a little bit of that coding in it as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I get what you mean. Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna go too much on like the people of color and queer culture, just because Ranger and I are both very white individuals.
Yes.
So
that's
it's not really.
that's
It's not our voice. It's really not our
Yes.
place to talk about. I just wanted to bring it up in the sense of I 100% think there could be a lot more done to have more people of color representation within, just with, like, as a general sense. I think there could be more within the gaming industry, but with, I think especially when it comes to queer content in gaming, or just queer content in general, I feel like we should be doing better as a society and a community to be trying to get more people of color queer representation. And also more gender identity stuff. Actually, we're talking about representation, because there's not a lot of either non-binary or transgender representation in really at all, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a game for that, and I can't, like, outside of a game of like Sims where you can make the character that.
Yeah, and Sims still
Non-binary.
it's still working towards it, and I think they could do a little bit more when it comes to that type of stuff. Like, I have said for a while, I think Sims should add a non-binary body type instead of just masculine and feminine. I do appreciate that they changed it from male and female to masculine and feminine, though. That's something I do really appreciate. I just think they could be doing a lot. They could do more with, like, the body modifications that you can do on characters. To try, because you can make non-binary looking characters, but normally they're going to lean more with clothing and stuff, but it's going to and even their body structures, but they're still going to end up leaning more feminine or masculine regardless, which isn't an issue. I think there's, like, a lot of hate in general for masculine presenting non-binary people. I've seen it all the time. There's a whole story that we will get into in a different podcast that I will talk about, with masculine non-binary people getting really disrespected. I lost my train of thought, Ranger.
Yeah, no, I think generally, like, even though representation has gotten a lot better over the last couple years, again, pointing at the fact that The Sims has made changes, even though it could be better, it's a lot better than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The fact there are games like Life is Strange, the fact that we have games like Fallout, Fable, Dragon Age Mass Effect, where you have those options, the fact it's getting better. It is getting better, I feel. It's just we're not entirely there yet.
Yeah, it's a slow process, but I appreciate the direction it's going in. Even if we talk about another game that actually isn't out yet, Last of Us 2, very anticipated game. The trailer literally has Ellie kissing presumably her girlfriend, within the first 30 seconds of the announcement trailer that they released years ago. And yeah, it's delayed a lot right now, which honestly I don't care. I would rather have a better game. Unless it means I have to buy a PlayStation 5 sooner than later, in which case you suck. But it's really, that's a really nice subtlety. They didn't have to make Ellie a lesbian, or presumably a lesbian. I will just call her queer for now. They didn't need to do that. There was not really a reason for it, to my knowledge. Maybe there is to help the story with the way the story is. Maybe they had to do that to make the story progress. But from right where it stands, they could have literally just made Ellie straight, and know what they did? They were like, F you, white, homophobic, sexist, gamer boys. Ellie's a lesbian, which I think was a really big power move. Kind of just making Tracer a lesbian, having Tracer be a lesbian, that's a big middle finger to all these little homophobic, sexist boys within the gaming community who are always just stop shoving the feminist and gay agenda down my throat. I'm so tired of seeing and even the Black Lives Matter agenda. Stop shoving all your racial and transgenderness and gayness and womanly vibes down my throat. And here are these AAA companies just being like, what if we just make the face of our game a lesbian? What if we do it? I would also if we could get maybe some more gays, gay guys as well, or non-binary characters in that too. But I'll take my lesbians.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about that game, but I've never played the first one, so I haven't actually been following it. But from what little I've heard of it, just from other people that played it sounds like a really interesting game series.
It is.
Especially knowing that about it, that's actually really cool to me.
Yeah, and I think they hinted towards it in the DLC for the original one. I'm not 100% sure, because I've never actually played Last of Us. I did watch a few different Let's Plays on it, but I never watched or ended up playing under the DLC myself. But I do believe it is Ellie's sexuality. I think it's somewhat hinted or talked about within that DLC. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% convinced. It might have just been fan theories that obviously turned into reality, since she now has a girlfriend in the Last of Us 2. It is a game that I definitely recommend getting. It's a really well-made game. I love it. And again, like what they did, I just love AAA companies kind of putting a middle finger into the universe to all these homophobic little brats in the gaming community, because that's what we need more companies, especially AAA companies. I love indies games, and they are some of our best representation for queer content. I'm part of Summer Pride again, which is a streaming event on Twitch, and I'm part of that again. The link will probably be in the video for this one, actually, since I'm bringing it up for the website. But most of the games that we play on that is actually queer, they're in a bunch of indie games, with some small exceptions. Life is Strange is on there, Dragon Age is on there, Mass Effect is on the roster. Also, EA actually reached out to Midbots, who's running Summer of Pride, and they reached out because they wanted to be part of the event in some way, which they technically are already. But Sims is also going to be part of our rotation. I will say that was probably partially a publicity thing for them, on the sense of they have their new Eco Living Pack coming out. But yeah, EA actually did reach out, which I think was that's a really big thing, I think. EA saw that we had this summer event going on again, and probably saw how successful it was last year, and was just we should get in on that, actually. That's actually really cool.
I don't know how to I feel like it's a good thing they did, but at the same time, I also wonder, what's the actual motivation behind it?
No, same. I saw that. I heard, we were told about that, and I was like, oh, that's cool. I am a little suspicious that it was mostly because they wanted to have more publicity for their eco living pack that's coming out, which I can't say anything. We are playing that on my stream the night it comes out, which is 4 days after this podcast goes live on YouTube. 3 days if you're watching this on or listening to this on SoundCloud. But I think that's still really cool. The fact that a AAA company was, even Twitch took notice of how much better this event was than what Twitch tried to do last year. Hashtag shade.
Oh, I didn't know we were going into the tea on this podcast.
Always, it's us. My new raid command is Shady Raid or whatever it is now. We had to go into some little bit of tea. But it's really cool seeing companies like take notice of an event like this that is empowering queer gamers and queer games and reaching out and being like, yo, we want to kind of be part of this, you know? Which I think is just like, I really enjoy that. I think that's a really nice touch on it, honestly, and it just makes me really happy. And same thing even when we're going to Twitch, which was originally it's a predominantly a game platform, but you know, it was originally a live streaming platform for video games. They took notice that Summer of Pride was run significantly better than the BS they tried to do with the very limited time slots for, I think it was like a 1 person a day or something. For I think it was like a 3-hour slot. No, it was 12 hours actually, I think, but they could have still done a lot more than they actually did last year. But Twitch, don't come for me if someone at Twitch headquarters watches this. Just help me get partnered. Cool, thanks.
Smooth.
I'm so subtle. Like, what?
No, I definitely, that's something else, is as far as companies and organizations go. Because I definitely notice a lot of them jump on the bandwagon during June. And don't get me wrong, I really appreciate that more of them kind of try to be supportive. I would just like to see more of them. And this is not just Twitch, this isn't just EA. This is just an overall thing. And I know this is getting a little off the topic, but it's relevant since, you know, Twitch.
Yeah.
I just wish it wasn't just June.
Yeah, same.
Where it's really obvious they're just going in because money. Like, can you guys be there and be supportive all the other 11 months of the year?
Exactly, and I think that goes into actually a completely different topic we could probably go into for an entire podcast, but I'll vaguely talk about is, it's the whole merchandising off of LGBTQI+. That is a huge thing. It's a big issue. And you notice if we look at it this year, because COVID, all Pride festivals throughout globally have been canceled. And now a lot of these companies that were always like, hey, we're here for you. And normally would be starting to, like, you know, show their support, quote unquote support, starting roughly early May, late April with all their new queer merchandise, which I think Target is actually an exception to that. They actually are releasing a Pride line still, but a lot of these companies that would release their Pride lines in May or you know, April to hashtag merchandise off of queer agendas aren't doing it anymore. And I think that ties into Twitch. I will say is in a different boat because they do actually do stuff for like every single month, where there's like something like Hispanic Heritage Month, I think is what it's called, if I remember correctly. Throughout that month, they did a thing like they did last year during summer, like June, where it was like for half the day they were featuring content creators of all sizes, mostly partners, large partners. Let's show representation for our smaller communities, please. And then during Black History Month, they did the same thing. And I think that's a really cool thing. Like, they're trying, and I just think they could be doing better. Like, why can't you showcase them more than just 12 hours? Why can't we showcase them for 24 hours and not just do partnered streamers? Or the mostly partner streamers, or even like a lot of time it's only affiliates that are larger affiliates, like affiliates that I'm following that were part of some of these different like that got featured on the front page during like some of these other like heritage months or like the Hispanic Heritage Month and stuff. And a lot of time it's like affiliate, if they're going for affiliates, it's normally affiliates who are like 40 plus average viewers, if not more. And it's like, why can't? Sorry, go ahead, Ranger.
No, you're fine. I feel like, as in particular with Twitch, which again, Twitch, don't come after me, please. I love you, but
don't hurt
I feel
us.
Twitch, and even to some extent, I'll kind of loop EA in here because I do appreciate them reaching out to be part of Summer of Pride, and because I actually really enjoy the fact that Summer of Pride is a thing actually. I feel like it's a good start, and I feel like it's good movement. It's what they should. It honestly is what they should be doing. It's just a matter of we need to make sure they know, and they need to act on the fact that we want you to do this. Please continue being supportive, but not just during this 30-day period, and don't limit it during that 30-day period too. Like you were saying with Twitch in particular, only doing that 3-hour block. I understand that they can't just stop the whole site and only focus on Pride.
I mean, they could.
Or just focus. Well, they could, but
like they could.
They don't. It comes into probably some business issues for them, but
which I could see, but they could still do. Because I think
like,
it's 3-hour slots for individuals, so they could still do it instead of only taking 12 hours out of a day and splitting it between 4 people. Do 3-hour slots still, which that's a good amount of time, but do 24 hours, and then you can do twice as many people and show that you actually care. Because I think that's a better show, and that's not just for Pride Month; it's for all these other random months. Features.
Yeah, because even to me, having 1 day a week for those 4 weeks. And then having time all of the other months, even if it is only a slot a day or something something more, they're getting there. I'm hoping on the back end of Twitch and Twitch administration and Twitch's back end that that's just something they're talking about and trying to work out. Where do they want to go? How do they want to be supportive? I don't know. I don't work for Twitch. I don't know anyone on the back end, but I sincerely do hope that on the back end of Twitch, on the back end of companies like EA and all the other gaming companies that somehow just totally left my mind,
Square Enix.
This is something they're actively talking about and working out. What way can they best support their entire demographic, their entire pool of gamers that want to be shown, want that representation, want to be seen by their favored companies?
I do believe certain things are, because I have gotten some tea from some reliable sources at Twitch, and I know there's some of the workers who are queer who are trying to push for better representation within the platform, which, in my opinion, why don't you partner let's change the partner requirements, but that's a whole completely different conversation. We could do an entire podcast of the ridiculous requirements to get partnered on Twitch, but partner more queer content creators on Twitch, more queer streamers, and let's start getting rid of the very blatant homophobic, racist, sexist, transphobic partnered streamers. Nuke their accounts. I understand there's a point to money, and I get they still need money coming in order to keep the site running how it is and keep it a free service that you can choose to give money on. However, what are you doing, and how are you showing that you're quote unquote actually represented, or you're wanting to be a safe environment for people, when you're allowing all these homophobic, transphobic, sexist, and racist streamers, especially partner streamers, to continue making money on your site? How does that make you look as a platform?
And especially if they're doing so by being said homophobic, transphobic, sexist, racist, especially if they're benefiting from that, and Twitch is directly benefiting from that too. It's not a good look. It really is not.
It's basically them getting blood money at this point, when you look at it like that, honestly. And that's just kind of gross. I love Twitch, don't get me wrong. I'm so happy to be a live streamer. It is something that I very much so would still love to be able to do full time. It's not really an option right now. Hopefully it will be in the future. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, not just on Twitch, but all these other companies like EA, for example, where they're really only showing this representation during a specific month. I will say they did do changes to the masculinity feminine, because they changed the preferences to masculine, feminine over female and male, and then also allowed you, even if your character has a masculine body type or a feminine body type, you can wear clothing regardless of its presentation of feminine or masculine, regardless of your character's portrayal. Same thing with clothing and makeup and all that stuff. They did that randomly, I think, outside of Pride Month actually, but it's still why can't we only get your support during Pride, June? Why can't we get it outside of Pride Month? We wanted more. We want, I don't want to say we want more in the sense, because that could give negative connotations, but we want to be able to have better representation throughout the year and not just in 1 month. Like, I appreciate
Yes.
that we have a Pride Month in the first place, because
Yeah.
if like things didn't go down the way they did, which we'll talk about. Actually, we're going to be talking about later this month. We wouldn't have a Pride Month right now if it wasn't for Stonewall. You know, that is like the where all this started, basically. And yeah, I don't want to sound ungrateful, I guess, for what we do have, but there definitely could be a lot better stuff going on, you know?
Yeah, and I think, to me, when it comes to things like Pride Month and representation and being that having that overall support, I feel, to me, it's so again, so important, just for the fact that we have so many kids, and not even just kids, adults, that are struggling with their identities, that even if they realize, yes, I am bi, yes, I am gay, yes, I am a lesbian, yes, I am ace or pan or whatever their identity is, because I'm blanking on some of the others I was
There's
just
a lot. We
of.
are the alphabet of Pride, okay?
Yeah.
But
it's just so important to have that support, because even if they acknowledge it inside, if the environment they're in isn't open or supportive of them being open with that, it can cause so many problems, just so many.
And that can go for so many different things too, because let's go back to video games a little bit, because we do actually have a couple more games I wanted to talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's go back into games a little, just like for like half a second. So there's also, there's so many different ways of doing representation. Like, for example, Animal Crossing, I think, is a really good example of it too, because Animal Crossing, and like something I like, which is in, I believe, to my knowledge, is in the last one, Isabelle will actually, during the Valentine's events, will regardless of your character's like masculine or feminine presentation, will admit that she has a crush on you, which I think that's just like a really cute touch, and like I think that's just really adorable. Aww. It's really cute. I know. I love that. That's just like really nice. And in the newest game, New Leaf. How do I not remember the newest Animal Crossing off the top? It probably is New Leaf, and I'm just blanking. But anyways,
isn't it New Horizons?
It's New Horizons, not New. I think New Leaf was the last one. Ignore me. Ranger knows more than I do, and I have actually played the game.
I could be wrong, but I thought that's what
No, it's New Horizons, or I was just blanking hard. They also don't refer to characters or pronouns. They will never refer to any of the characters or pronouns, at least the playable characters, which I actually think is like really neat, because that just by default means everyone is literally non-binary. Can we like live in a future where pronouns are just non-existent? And, like, you just don't refer to anyone with they, them, he, him, she, her. I personally use they and them, but like, let's just live where it's like I reference to a current person is, this is Maddie. Maddie is cool. You don't use pronouns because inclusivity. But no, it's not. The reason I like that is because they're trying to get around regulations and stuff within Japan, since Nintendo is a company in Japan. They just like, no, we're getting rid of pronouns, because I believe because there's something to do with the rating system globally, that if they were to use pronouns, because they do have two masculine presenting characters, I am blanking on their names right now, in New Horizons, that are a couple, and they refer to each other as partners when they show up on your islands. I believe because of that, to avoid having to have a higher age requirement or whatever on, and keep it for everyone, like the game is literally meant for any ages, for everyone.
Yeah.
They just like, you know what? If we get rid of pronouns, y'all can't do anything. You can't touch us. What you gonna do, bro? Like, what? Nintendo's like, here, like, let's go. Let's go, boys. You can't outsmart Nintendo. But then on the flip side, there's Fire Emblem. I have a lot of feelings about Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem isn't bad. The thing that, because things like slowly been adding more queer romance options and whatnot. The things that I'm a little salty about with Fire Emblem, though, is that for the male romance options as a gay person, the characters you can romance are more feminine presenting, which isn't a bad thing, but why can't I have a more masculine romance option? Why is it mostly, if not all, I think it's all, I think there's like 2 romance options as a guy, to romance other guys. I think, don't quote me on that, I haven't played the game myself, I might be remembering it wrong from what I've looked up and whatnot. They're both more on the feminine side of like long hair and stuff, which it's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's like nice representation that you don't always get to see. However, that's just personally like my thing, my type of guy. You know, I don't really like a more feminine presenting guy personally, but that's just me. I do like all men. Men are all beautiful. Everyone's beautiful. But you know what? People have preferences. But also for some reason, as the female player character, you can literally romance every of the house members. Like you can romance the female one and the 2 men. As a female playable character. But if you pick the masculine or male presenting playable character, you can only romance the girl. You can't romance either of the male house leaders, which I think is like a really weird to me. Like I don't understand why that's a thing. Like maybe there'll be an update or DLC in the future where they will allow that. But I think it's a little messed up that like, why can the girl romance all 3 house leaders but not the guy
character?
Yeah, and that's like those are like my biggest things of it. Like I would think Fire Emblem, I think, is a good start, especially since like they're, unlike Animal Crossing, is male and female. Like they're very much so more, they use pronouns and everything. So I appreciate that there's even same-sex romance options in the first place, because they didn't have to add that, and they did actually start adding that in the last Fire Emblem, but that was like 1 each. Like you could only romance 1 girl as the girl and 1 guy as the guy.
Yeah, which I feel like the issue, and I've never played a Fire Emblem, so I'm coming at this from more of the like a theoretical standpoint, I guess you could say, is I feel like the issue of the male not being able to romance all of them, but the female could do all of them, would be less of an issue if it was there was more diversity. Like the female could only do 3 of them, and the guy can only do 3 of them, and it changes which. It's not necessarily the same ones.
See, I think that would be an interesting twist, though, if it like changed to you could romance.
And I also feel like it also speaks to another issue of like not all games necessarily have to represent everything, but the fact that it is so limited, the fact that the ones that do, and it's obvious how limited it is, it makes it stand out even more that like it has that shortcoming at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, though?
No, I understand what you mean. And I know part of it is also because, again, Nintendo and the game, obviously, because Fire Emblem is a Nintendo property, stems from Japan. They have a different set of regulations, a different culture. And that is part of the reason why they have to handle certain things as they do.
Differently.
Exactly. But I will say Nintendo is significantly better than company. I'm going to read the filth now because I'm a salty little bee. Atlas. Frickin' Atlas. I have so many feelings about this company. I absolutely love some of the games they produce, but I am so salty and frustrated that Persona 5, which is an RPG game, doesn't have any queer character. Well, correction, it had really poor represented queer characters before they did Persona 5 Royals, which was basically a remake of the original Persona 5, which was made a few years ago. But you can't romance any male characters as the protagonist who is a guy. You can romance pretty much every girl that you haven't come in contact with that is a main character. You can even romance your female teacher, which is kind of gross because she's your teacher. Different culture, I guess, but you can't romance any men. You can't romance men at all. And you also have to turn down all the women if you want to progress, because you're able to level up they use tarot as a form of a battle system, and so you're able to up your major arcana power abilities or whatever, however you want to phrase it, by strengthening your friendship with the characters that represent each of these major arcanas that are in the protagonist's life. And as you go through that, you're forced to turn down, to my knowledge, and you end up to a point with pretty much every female character that's represented by these major arcanas, you're forced to basically turn down each of the female characters. Again, I could be remembering this wrong. This is stuff that I've watched, I've looked up, watched, and talked to people about. But you can romance any of the male characters, even though the focal group that you play as when you're battling and stuff is a bunch of misfits, basically. And that just seems really weird because queer culture in itself is kind of misfit-y, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of
Yeah.
queer characters are in that off group a lot of the time. Or I guess in some situations you do end up being the popular kid if you're a skinny white gay twink. Cough, cough. And I just think that's a really frustrating for me, and I know like a lot of other people who are just like, why? If like I get like they're afraid of like losing money and stuff like that from their own like from Japan sales, but in the flip side, I know there's people like myself who I didn't buy Persona 5 or Persona 5 Royals. Well, I didn't buy Persona 5 because I didn't have the PlayStation at the time, but I didn't buy Persona 5 Royals because I was like, they just didn't add any queer characters at all, like whatsoever. They like fixed some two characters that were really grossly stereotypical to the point of harmful representation. That were aggressively inappropriate flirting with one of the protagonist's best friends, who's also one of the playable characters when you're battling in the dungeons. But it's like they did. I don't know if they got rid of them or toned it down a lot. I actually don't know, because again, I just have no interest in Persona 5 Royals because they didn't add queer representation within the game. But you know, so that's a thing, and I think that's like a really big issue. Like, these are two companies, Atlas and Nintendo, that are both Japan or like based companies, and they're both handling queer content so differently, you know. And Atlas isn't, and also is notorious for having kind of disrespectful representation. I've been talking for 50 years. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm very passionate about this. Really, really passionate about this. And then you go into their game Catherine, which is also another thing, which I'm actually really proud of. Somewhat proud. I need to play the remake of Catherine, but Catherine is a game that came out, I want to say somewhere between 8 and 10-ish years ago or something along those lines, and there's a transgender male to female character in there, and if you don't know the game, it'll be a little weird trying to explain this because I'm really bad at explaining. They were kind of disrespectful to her, but basically at night there is this like weird nightmare dimension that you go to, and like people get sent there for being, I think, cheating or being like, men get sent there for being deceitful and stuff like that, I believe, to their like partners. I think exclusively female at the time that came out, but the character, Erica is her name. She's a transgender male to female person. She was there. They sent her there even though it was all men in this nightmare dimension. There was no woman in the nightmare dimension. They sent her there because she didn't tell the dude she was with that she's trans. And that's a huge issue for obvious reasons. A trans woman isn't a man. They were assigned male at birth, but they are a woman. They were born into the wrong body. Mm-hmm.
Yikes.
And that was
yikes.
That's a huge yikes. That's a huge issue that they had in the first one. But they did correct that. I believe that is not really a thing anymore in the first one. Erica's still in the remaster. She's still in the remake of the game. I'm calling it a remake because they did change a lot. It's technically a remaster, but still. So they did actually fix that. They did properly represent Erica, or at least do better representation for a transgender character, which I appreciate. I appreciate the fact that a transgender character is actually in a AAA game. And again, I need to play it again myself before I give a proper opinion on whether or not they completely fixed representation, because they might not have. But again, this is from what I've like heard and read and talked to people about and whatnot. And then they actually added a gay romance option, which actually is
that's nice.
Yeah, so like there's like the two female romance options that were in the original, and then they added a gay romance option as well, which I think is really cool. And I believe by the end of the game you're able to choose who you want to romance. So I actually think that's really cool that they actually kind of fixed the representation a little bit, or a lot of it, and then also added a gay romance option as well, because the main character is a man, obviously. But I do think they could still be stepping down, because it kind of bugs me, like, why? I know Catherine is a smaller title, and maybe that's why they felt they could experiment a little bit more with it than Persona, but it's just like, how can I romance a teacher in Persona 5, but I can't romance one of my male classmates?
And I think that, again, comes to the issue that because there isn't nearly enough representation in general, the game's not including it, or only partially including it, look glaringly bad. Like
Yeah.
if there was equal representation, or at least much better overall representation, I feel like a game deciding, well, we really don't want this in this particular game would not be the glaring issue that it is.
I mean, one could also argue it would be a bigger issue than, like, it's not like it's a huge issue that they didn't add something that wasn't originally in the game, And that's,
Well,
like, I find it as an issue of where, why, it's like it's because of the group being a misfit group, there should be at least one queer character, I feel like, within that group.
well, yeah,
even if it's
game,
not a romance option, and it's just my queer heart also wanting more queer representation, obviously, because I do think we are lacking representation, and so if I can get it, especially in a AAA company, which would be huge to have more AAA companies doing this. Like, again, I love indie games, and I appreciate that indie developers are making so many queer games, and games with queer content in them, don't get me wrong. I have an entire playlist for Summer of Pride last year, which is mostly, I think, if not mostly indie games, yeah. But it's just, like,
there should be more AAA.
There should be more triple. Exactly. And again, I do appreciate though that they did fix the issues to Catherine. I will say that it's just when you compare them to Nintendo, since they're both Japanese, or base companies, it's kind of like Nintendo outshows like everyone though. Let's be real. I love Nintendo so much. I think Nintendo is one of, if not the best, one of the best gaming companies out there. I've always loved them. I grew up playing Nintendo games. But, again, Persona 5 just has that weird thing of, like, why can I only romance female characters? Especially when it's not a focal point of the game. Why is it there in the first place if it's not a major point? Honestly, I feel like now me talking about this is going to get so many hate comments. Could get so many hate comments if, like, the right person discovers this. And I wanted to say, we are not, and I guess me specifically, because I'm talking so much smack right now about Atlas, I am not saying I hate these games. I'm not saying I think Ranger can attest. We're not saying we have opinions. We stated this earlier. A lot of our podcasts are going to be opinionated based over factual based with some of these, where there are facts there, and then we are talking about them. These are personal opinions. Please do not cancel us or come for us because of opinions. Everyone's allowed to have opinions.
Yes. Well, in fairness, there also are some opinions that aren't really good to have, but I don't feel like that's the case in this instance. But I feel like, when I said what I said, I didn't necessarily mean in respect to just Persona 5.
No, yeah.
Because I definitely feel like, again, I haven't played it, but going off what you're saying, it sounds like there should be more representation, just by the fact there is such a focus on the outcasts, the people that are not accepted by society. But I think in general, if we lived in a world where, at least in gaming, since we're talking about gaming, if, like, 50% of games featured straight couples and 50% featured LGBT couples, or individuals, I guess I should say. A game saying we're only going to have lesbians, or only straight couples, or only...
Okay, I get your point a little, yeah.
Because then you'd know, like, oh, well, that's just one out of our 50, or that's just one out of their 50.
Yeah, like, if it was a mixture of both.
But because gaming still is 90%...
Or more like 95.
No or bad representation, and 10% okay-ish to good representation, it makes it look even worse when the representation isn't there, or the representation is actively harmful.
And I do feel like, even if it's not, like, even if it's a side character, like, I feel like it's a little unnatural in a way to not have more representation. Like, again, even if it's like a minor character here and there, or something that's like maybe a person of color, or a queer person, or a queer person of color, or something, like, it just feels so weirdly unnatural to me to not have more representation, even if it's not in the main cast, which obviously I would love if more games had representation in the main cast, but it's kind of just like,
even in the background, where they could in theory, put something in the background, and people may not even notice it, which, if they're background characters, that's kind of the point of background characters.
Yeah,
but
like a pride
they're
flag
not
or
necessarily
something.
doing that either.
Because, like, for example, in Spider-Man, like, there's just a random mall in Spider-Man, the newest Marvel's Spider-Man, or whatever the game is that one of my moderators on Twitch loves this. Remind me I haven't finished. There's just a random brick wall that is painted a rainbow. There's like random pride flags randomly spread out through the game that I've discovered. Like, there's like small things like that you can do in your game that like isn't not an actual LGBT character. No, it's not an actual LGBT character, but it's still showing representation in a kind of minimal way that if someone should say you're shoving in their face at that point, it's like, what the hell? It's literally a random flag that's not even part of the story. It's just an aesthetic type of thing, you know? And obviously queer characters and people of color characters would be preferred. But even just those small things, if it like just doesn't really fit in, I guess having a character's sexuality just be unsaid or queer in nature, having or that like random pride flag or side character or something that talks about their like boyfriend or their girlfriend or husband or wife as like a a queer couple would be like a really big step, not big, but I wouldn't say big step in the right direction, but it's still a step in the right direction, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely so. Like, that actually reminded me of, like, Watch Dogs 2, actually. The fact that there's an area in Watch Dogs 2 where... And actually, we talked about this the other day, that it has the rainbow crosswalk.
Yep, it has. Oh, yeah, because you didn't know that was a thing.
I didn't know that was a thing until Watch Dogs 2.
That's right. Yeah, Ranger, it was funny. So, because Ranger and I were talking about that the other day, and, like, Watch Dogs 2 has a rainbow sidewalk, and that's, like, she thought it was just a cute feature in the game, but it's a thing in real life. Like, there's rainbow crosswalks in real life, Ranger. You're welcome. You're welcome for educating you. Like, I think I'm pretty sure San Francisco and LA both have them. I think Oakland might have them too. Hi, I'm moving back to California later this year, so it's on my brain right now. But yeah, there's like New York, I think, has them too. Like, there's like random cities that are like rainbow sidewalks. Ranger is not just a thing in video games. Where it gets
like, legitimately, I've never seen them and I've never heard of them, so I think it's infinitely cool that that's a thing.
See, that's another thing. Why can't just randomly add a rainbow sidewalk in your games? Like, just like, pride flag, great, cool. Let's just have a rainbow sidewalk.
Yeah, because legitimately, it's one of those details that either you know about it or you don't. Like. Mm-hmm.
Especially depending on the type of game you're playing, you know? Like, if you're playing Watch Dogs 2, it's just like... Or even, like, a GTA game, it's just like, oh, there's a random rainbow crosswalk. Actually, GTA is an example of where, like, if I remember correctly, not a lot of people obviously play the story missions, but if I remember correctly, I think one of your side mission, like, go-to people is actually gay, if I'm remembering properly from GTA 5. So that's also another example of just, like, random side character that you get missions from in a game... that just happens to be queer, you know? Like, that's just like a very small example of representation, you know, that can go a long way in the right direction of opening people's minds and opening it up for more games, and gaming companies can be like, you know what, I could probably do something like that in my game, you know?
Yeah, and that's actually something interesting with Watch Dogs 2, which I don't know why I didn't include it in our notes for earlier in the podcast.
Because we're a mess.
Yeah, we're a hot mess. But in Watch Dogs 2, you had two storyline, not main characters. I actually don't know the identities of the main characters, strangely, or at least I don't remember. But there were two characters in the story that were LGBT characters. One was on the hero side, or the player character side, and the other was a villain.
Oh, so that's actually really neat.
And that was interesting, because I've been thinking about this last couple of minutes, because I was like, it seems really bad that the only real representation of a character for LGBT is the villain, but then I remembered there is one on your side.
I personally don't mind villain queer characters, and I will go into that in a second. Go ahead, Ranger, sorry.
Yeah, no, it was just a point that I just realized looking at the photos from Watch Dogs that, yeah, like, character-wise... and story-wise, there are characters with that little bit of that representation. They're not main characters, but they're fundamental parts of the story.
No, I actually like that. I mean, tying into, like, a little bit of the villain thing is... I don't know. I know some people get really mad when the only queer character or queer-coded characters are villains. But, like, growing up for, like, a lot of millennials and even older generations, a lot of time the only queer, coded characters... at all were the villains. Like, you can see it a lot in Hades. Hades is very much so a character that, like, collectively the queer community is like, yeah, he's, like, really, really queer-coded, you know? And, like, just, like, Disney's, like, had a history of, like, queer-coding a lot of villains, you know? And...
Ursula.
Ursa's literally based off a drag queen.
A drag queen.
And so, like, I don't hate representation when it comes in the form of villains when it comes to queer characters. However, I do think you could do more. You could obviously add more heroes, kind of like how Watch Dogs had, like, one on either side. But, you know, again, I don't personally hate the trope of a gay supervillain because, you know, goals. So, my goal is to be a villain.
I think for me, the issue and the reason why, like, it doesn't necessarily bother me or anything, but it kind of does, is because especially early on when that was some of the only representation.
Yeah, that's where it became an issue, was when only representation was...
Why is it only bad guys that are LGBT? Why aren't some of the good guys? Like, does that mean LGBT people are always bad? Which obviously isn't the case.
We're sinners. I'm sorry.
And, like, it comes back again, like, if there was more equal representation or more variety of representation, having a queer or LGBT villain wouldn't be a big deal, because it's just a villain that happens to be LGBT.
And even now, I don't think it's as bad, though, too, because, like...
Yeah, it's not.
Like, 10 years ago, it would have been... that was a bad thing, but now I'm like, there's a little bit better representation, so, like, having the only gay person or queer character in a game or movie or show being the villain, not ideal, but it's a representation that I still appreciate at this point, honestly. Especially if they're a well-designed and writ character.
Yes.
Because that was another thing, too.
Yeah, like, just generally characters being not well written. To take it back to Watch Dogs 2, that's why I actually appreciate the fact that there was one on both sides, because just like with all groups, whether it's a minority group or not, you're going to have good people and you're going to have bad people.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how people are. There's good people and bad people. Or I should say people that act good, people that act bad, I guess, would be a better way to put it.
Yeah, because that goes into a whole topic.
Yeah, it goes a whole different topic. But so having the representation of both sides, like, they should not, like, LGBT characters should not always be the hero. Because that's not reality. There's some not nice LGBT people in the world. Unfortunately.
We have some podcast talk coming up.
We have a podcast about one of them coming up in a couple weeks.
Like some gay people are killers. Like,
yeah, like, and then there's some that do amazing things for the world and are incredibly charitable and generous and amazing people, because at the end of the day, we're all people, regardless of what sexual identity we have. We're all people of different personalities, of interests, of traits. But it just comes back again to, if there's more equal representation, having the villain being the only representative in a single game wouldn't be problematic.
Yeah, and I mean, even then, like, having, like, one could argue that it's not necessarily problematic if the only queer character in a video game is the villain, but that comes down, for me at least, is, like, I don't personally mind that all that much if the character is well written, because you could have the hero, or a hero character, or a neutral character in a video game be queer, and if they're poorly written, then it's kind of like, well, that's still kind of crappy, you know?
Yeah, and it's gross, yeah.
So in that case, I'm like, I would much rather have the only queer character be a villain who's just
a well-written character.
Well-written, rounded character. Versus a hero character that maybe is a really bland queer character that's like, they're kind of just there for the sake of having representation, which isn't really representation. Like, if you're adding a queer character just for
the representation, it's its own set of issues.
It's its own set of issues, which I guess kind of is contradictory to what we were talking about earlier of having, like, really passive characters, but it's different when it's like a character that's like a name character versus this background couple that's gay or something, or pride flags.
Well, I think it comes down to intent, which this is probably its own podcast topic on its own, as far as that quote-unquote forced representation goes, or as far as the token representation
intent
goes.
On representation could be its own podcast, honestly.
Because I think when it comes to that, it would come down to, is the intention of having a diverse and representative group of characters or environment of the game, or is it because you know that adding this type of character is going to make you the money?
Yeah, exactly.
But again, that's its own subject and discussion for another day.
Yeah. So I think to, like, tie everything in for, like, a final thought, I would say is that, like, representation, since that was, like, the main point of this entire podcast, within, I'm going to say, gaming community, because we did branch off for, like, a decent amount of time on, like, Twitch and, like, games and stuff. Like, it's just representation in general within gaming and the gaming community, or games and the gaming community, is, like, it's important because it's important for people to have, like, some to have that, to have something they can grasp onto, to have someone they can like look up to, you know, even if it's a fictional character, you know.
Yeah.
And there's things that is getting worked on. There's things that are getting, we're working towards a better representation overall, and we're slowly getting to that point. It's just it could be better, and it's
Yes.
not in a bad place relative to where it was 10 years ago, but it could be better.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see as far as representation in gaming companies, and gaming-related spaces. It looks vastly different now from 10 years ago. I'm really curious to see where it's going to look 10 years from now.
Ideally, I would honestly, if we're talking about 10 years from now, like, I would love to be at a point in 10 years. God, I'm going to be in my 30s. Ew. I love your...
thanks.
I love your Ranger. But I would love to be like 10 years from now where there's representation for not just queerness or like, you know, transgender, well, queer ties into queerness, ignore me, like not just queerness but also like people of color. Like I would love to see a more equal part of representation for people of color and queer characters. Like I would love to see it to be where all games, and I say all games because I really think it's not that hard to just add a background character or background pride flags or something that are people of color or queer people of some sort, that in every game there, even if it's not a main character, even though I would love to have a lot more games in like 10 years where the main cast is a lot more diverse than it currently is in most games. A lot of games are still mostly like white people. That's where I would like to be. Like, there's more diversity in 10 years to the point where this isn't really a controversial issue anymore, or just an issue in general of lack of representation.
Like, to me, honestly, my ideal is if we could reach a point where, regardless of what kind of characters and what the characters are, what the makeup of the world are, that we get to a point where the game comes out, and there's not going to be any backlash from one side or the other, or there's not going to be drama because it's not done well enough, just because they're all going to be done well enough.
Yeah. Like, just basically equal representation that is proper representation for people of color and also queer, because that was, again, the main focus of this. I just keep saying people of color because they also deserve, people of color deserve better representation than they currently have as well.
And I would even add in there positive representation, and I don't mean that by villain or hero. I mean just general positive, well-written, well-created representation of like
regardless
LGBT
if they're a villain or a hero,
people of different races.
Because again, you can
women,
because you can be a villain and be a good character in the sense if you're just the character was well designed, just like you could be a good character, like a hero character, and be poorly designed. Because there's so many times I've played some games, I can't think of any off the top of my head, where the villain's amazing and then the hero's like, you suck. Like, you're so poorly written. Like, why are you here? Like, no one asked you to be this crappy.
I think that's basically the sum up of it, is just that it's getting better. It's progressively getting better. Just hopefully it will reach a point where it's where it should be, or where it should have always been.
And on that note, I would say we're out of time because we're starting to kind of go into stuff that would be a different podcast in itself. But if you guys are actually interested in us in doing the intent of representation within, or representation's intention, or whatever, however you want to phrase it, within gaming, the gaming community, because that's something that's going to be really big for Ranger and I. Let us know in the comments if you guys are watching this on YouTube, actually. Also, or SoundCloud. I'm pretty sure SoundCloud actually has a comment section, if I remember correctly. Also, make sure you guys like and subscribe this video, or like this video. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also follow us on SoundCloud. Also, make sure to follow us on our other social medias. The links for all
Twitter.
of those will be down in the description of this video if you guys are on YouTube.
Yeah, and then too, guys, I know we've talked about a lot of games today, but if there's any you feel like we missed and we should probably address in the future, let us know in the comments about those too, because we're always looking for new games or different games. for us, even just to play in general, especially as Twitch streamers, but to be able to discuss as part of podcasts, I feel like it'd be good to have some feedback from you guys on what games you feel we need to discuss.
Also, if you also actually, on that note too, like, if you guys disagree or agree with anything we said, let us know. Like, let us know your viewpoints, because I think Ranger would agree. We're not really against doing a second podcast that is just representation or added representation on the queer content within the gaming community and games in general, and elaborating more on some of these games. So if you guys want us to elaborate a little bit more on a podcast that is like elaborating more on like open world RPG games, kind of like Mass Effect, kind of like Fable a little bit, because I think Fable's kind of in that thing, or Fallout, and like, you know, Dragon Age, let us know, because Ranger and I are so open to comments and whatnot.
Yeah, and especially considering some of the things, not necessarily just with this one, but in general as we do this podcast, we're going to be discussing topics that could be potentially controversial or have a lot of differing feelings and opinions on it. And we definitely want to know, like, what you guys think and feel about that, what you think and feel about ours, because maybe you guys will teach us something we didn't know.
Educate us. We are not just trying to be educators here. I mean, I guess that we are a little bit, but, you know. But on the note, we probably should stop rambling and actually end the video. So again, guys, we're gonna also, on a quick note, because we didn't actually mention this earlier before we actually officially end, we are gonna be uploading on YouTube every Monday, more or less. We may end up accidentally missing a week here and there because life happens, and then we'll also be uploading on SoundCloud and hopefully eventually other social media platforms on Tuesdays.
Yep.
No specific time right now. It's just Monday and Tuesday. But again, guys, like, comment, and also subscribe. And again, follow us on on our other social medias. They will all be linked in the description of this video, and on if you guys are on YouTube, that is. So I hope you have a good night or day or whatever. Good night or good day. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.